Recently, it seems like there's been a lot of different business-related news in the sports card world, but there's one story that has seemed to fall through the cracks a bit that is actually really interesting and has a story behind it that is worthy of its own television drama series. Let's look at this. In late 2023, CollectibleXchange, a collectibles marketplace owned by Brian Steiner, which is a name to keep in mind and will be an important part of this story, bought StarStock, the formerly highly regarded sports card online marketplace that crashed and burned a couple of years ago after being a hobby darling of the sports card market for several eye blinks worth of time. But StarStock's business model was really based on needing a sports card market that would be constantly increasing in value. So when the sports card market boom turned upside down and began coming back down to earth again, StarStock's demise was rapid, and it sat relatively stagnant, but now looks to perhaps be resurrected into a new form, if indications are correct. But before we get into the future of StarStock, let's try to understand the background of CollectibleXchange because it is fascinating. The background. To understand the background of CollectibleXchange, it's best to first understand the background of Steiner Sports. And this story is a lot more interesting than I was expecting. The founder of CollectibleXchange is a man named Brandon Steiner, who also once owned one of the largest sports card memorabilia businesses in the game, Steiner Sports. Brandon Steiner started Steiner Sports back in 1987, using his entire $8,000 savings account to get it going. It was started as a sports marketing company that aimed to pair up athletes with businesses that wanted to draw customers in. Just 6 years later, by 1993, Steiner Sports had made profits of upwards of $5 million. After that, Steiner Sports continued to do quite well, but in 2000, Brandon Steiner decided to sell his company to the Omnicom Group for $25 million. And this part here is important. They decided to keep him on as CEO in control of day-to-day operations of the business. In some ways, it seems like this arrangement kind of made Brandon Steiner think that he still owned the company, and we'll see how that played out just a little bit later in the story here. During the next 19 years, up until May 2019, Brandon Steiner continued to be the CEO of Steiner Sports, and the company did a lot during those years. They built relationships with the Yankees, the Dallas Cowboys, Notre Dame University, and all of the different professional sports teams that use Madison Square Garden to market various types of team collectibles, such as game-used bats, bases, balls, jerseys, caps, and lineup cards. In 2011, Newsday called Steiner one of the most innovative, influential figures in the history of sports memorabilia. By most accounts, despite some minor scandals along the way, Steiner was regarded as a very successful CEO of one of the most successful sports memorabilia businesses out there. So the phone call he received on May 31st, 2019 must have been a major surprise to him. In the time leading up to this phone call, Steiner had been in the process of negotiating with the company called Legends, which is a company that is a joint venture of the Yankees Global Enterprise and Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Their main thing is running concession stands and operating stalls of various kinds at stadiums around the country. But the call he received on May 31st, 2019 would change these plans. As I mentioned earlier, Steiner Sports was not owned by Brandon Steiner at the time. It hadn't been since it had been sold to Omnicom back in 2000, so he actually had no power to sell the company to Legends, as he had been working on doing. So when he received this phone call on May 31st, 2019, saying that Steiner Sports was being sold, he was completely caught off guard. He had been at Yankee Stadium watching a Yankees versus Red Sox game when the fateful call came in, and he rushed out of the stadium to the office immediately. When he got there, armed guards stood by the front doors and refused to let him enter the building. Omnicom had sold the business without informing him. And who, you ask, was it who bought Steiner Sports? It was none other than, wait for it, Michael Rubin, the billionaire owner of none other than Fanatics. Steiner learned that Fanatics had managed to negotiate to buy out Steiner Sports for less than $10 million, and that it included all the company's intellectual property and inventory. On top of that, when Michael Rubin and Fanatics acquired Steiner Sports, the idea expressed was that at least some of the employees would keep their jobs, just under a new business name. But instead, just a few months later, all Steiner Sports employees were laid off, and Steiner Sports was completely laid to rest. Fanatics had bought it out and killed it, using quick, decisive, and rather brutal business practices to cut out one of its sports memorabilia competitors. This sounds like a pretty familiar story, really. A lot of what Fanatics has been doing to cut the heart out of Panini to try to crush them under the weight of their constantly growing power seems like it's coming from a similar playbook. But Brandon Steiner clearly does not seem like someone who likes to rest on his laurels and just kick back and relax. No, instead, just months after all this fiasco with losing the business he had been building for the past 32 years, Brandon decided to simultaneously start two brand new companies in late 2019, the Steiner Agency and CollectibleXchange. The Steiner Agency essentially has the same business model that Steiner had started with back in 1987, connecting professional athletes to brands and companies for promotional purposes, while CollectibleXchange, CX, is essentially an online sports memorabilia marketplace with some additional business services that do sound kind of intriguing. For example, CX can be used by players, coaches, or others as a platform to sell their own collectible memorabilia, such as game-used items or autographed collectibles. CX also claims to be able to design, create, market, warehouse, and ship player-branded apparel, food products, and cosmetics. So as well as being a collectible and sports memorabilia marketplace platform, essentially they seem to want to be a one-stop shop for an athlete to be able to build their own independent label or brand as well, which I personally think is kind of a fascinating idea. In this day and age of social media and the influx of personal branding, I'm surprised this idea isn't something that already exists, to be honest. A company that can help an athlete to build his or her own personal brand sounds like something that could be very lucrative. But looking at their website, it's clear that it's mostly an online sports memorabilia marketplace at the moment. If you click on the trading card tab on their website, it now proudly announces that StarStock, the stock market of sports cards, with more than 1.3 million sports cards and sealed boxes currently in their vault, is open for business. And this gets us up to the StarStock part of this story. For those of you who aren't familiar with StarStock, it's a sports card marketplace that started in November of 2019, just as the sports card market boom was just getting itself ready to explode. StarStock did a few things to make themselves stand out in the sports card market space, and as the sports card market took off, StarStock took off right along with it, becoming a darling among sports card influencers and quickly becoming one of the most popular sports card marketplaces around. Unfortunately for StarStock, their rise in the sports card space would only last as long as the sports card spike itself, and I would suggest this was largely to be expected. In some ways, their marketplace's business model almost required card values to constantly be increasing, and it also required a constant movement of cards. On top of that, with their approach to almost pre-grading every single raw card sent in and categorizing them into A, B, or C categories, depending on the quality of the condition, it required painstaking man-hours to get cards into the system. Add to this that there just didn't seem to be a unified vision among StarStock's higher-ups about where the company was going, and it just seemed StarStock was destined to fail. All this is to say, they didn't have a sustainable business model. Once they themselves realized that, they tried some various things, such as live group breaks, on-platform live single card auctions, and eventually they even tried to live auction random NFT projects too. But all of these efforts seem more like last-ditch flailing arm efforts that were destined to fail, as they really didn't seem well thought out or well executed at all. I was a buyer and seller on StarStock at that time as I was watching their downfall, and the incompetence in these flailing arm efforts was really starkly obvious. So in late 2021, early 2022, StarStock announced that they would no longer be taking submissions of raw sports cards, while simultaneously unceremoniously announcing that they were laying off half of their employees with no warning on a Friday at 5 p.m., just as the workday was ending for the weekend. Have a good weekend, y'all! And after that, StarStock just kind of sat there. Some transactions still happen here and there, but very few. Most sellers have already shipped their cards back to themselves, sometimes waiting up to a year before they finally arrived, due to the extreme backlog of so many people requesting to have their cards shipped to themselves. It's mostly an inactive marketplace at this point. But that being said, there still sits something like 1.3 million cards on the platform. They do actually still have an infrastructure for a sports card marketplace that could still work if it was tweaked and if it was actually nurtured, something that StarStock stopped doing long before their downfall. And that must be what CollectibleXchange sees: potential. But StarStock did fail for a reason, a multitude of reasons really. So it's not a plug-and-play business by any means. I don't know how much StarStock was bought for, but for the sake of the health of CollectibleXchange, I hope it wasn't too much. What I hope this purchase isn't is the flailing arms attempt of a business mogul who is just frustrated that his new company isn't up to the muster of competing against the mega massiveness that is Fanatics, and this is just going to be a failed attempt that goes nowhere. It certainly would make a kind of dark poetic sense for StarStock's flailing arm demise to lead them to sell themselves off to someone someone else who simply uses them for their own flailing arm antics. But I hope that's not what this is. I hope it's the emergence of a genuine player in the sports card market space. I think it's good for the hobby to have options, as long as those options are well run and legit. I don't have any sort of sense about CollectibleXchange at this point, but who knows? Steiner does have a certain track record. I just don't know if he knows much about why StarStock failed, and whether he's just going to continue to run a business that was already mostly driven into the ground, even further into the ground, or whether something new will emerge from the previous wreckage. To be completely honest, I'm hoping for the best, but expecting the worst with this one. It's a fascinating story though, I'll definitely give it that.